At my son's wedding reception, the moment I approached with my gift, Jackson grabbed my arm and hissed, "Get out, Mom. My fiancé doesn't want you here." 200 guests turned to stare. My heart shattered as I walked away in silence, my navy dress sticky with spilled champagne. For 40 years I'd poured everything into that boy and the family ranch his father left us. The next morning my phone rang. "Mom, I need the ranch keys." I took a deep breath and told him 4 words he'll never forget. I never thought my own son would break my heart like that. Not my Jackson, not the boy who once picked wildflowers for me every Sunday morning before church. Pinewood Ranch has been my home for over 30 years. When my husband Sam died of a sudden heart attack, I was left alone with our 10-year-old son and 600 acres of land that had been in the family for generations. Many folks suggested I sell the place and move into town. It was too much for a woman alone, they said. But this land wasn't just property to me. It was the future Sam and I had built together, the legacy we wanted to leave our son. So I learned everything there was to know about cattle ranching. I studied animal husbandry and crop rotation. I mastered fence repair and tractor maintenance. I calloused my hands and weathered my skin under the Texas Sunday. And through it all, I raised Jackson to love this land the way his father had. Every decision I made was for Jackson's future. I put off replacing the leaky roof so I could afford his baseball camp. I drove an old truck with 200,000 miles on it so he could have new school clothes. When college acceptance letters arrived, I remortgaged part of the ranch so he could attend without student loans. "A solid education is the best investment," I told him on move-in day, helping him unpack in his dorm room. "Your daddy would be so proud of you." Jackson graduated with a business degree and took a job with a real estate firm in Dallas. Though I missed him terribly, I understood his need to forge his own path. He'd visit on holidays and long weekends, always full of stories about city life. I cherished those visits, hoping that someday he'd realize that Pinewood was where he truly belonged. Then last spring, Jackson called with excitement in his voice I hadn't heard in years. "Mom, I've met someone. Her name is Heather Walker. She's amazing, smart, beautiful, ambitious. I think she might be the one." My heart soared with hope. At 30, Jackson was finally thinking about settling down. Maybe they'd move back to the ranch. Maybe there'd be grandchildren running through the same fields where Jackson once played. A month later, they visited. Heather was indeed beautiful, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a dazzling smile. She wore more jewelry to a casual ranch visit than I owned altogether, but I didn't mind. She made my son happy, and that was all that mattered. "What a quaint place," Heather said, looking around the farmhouse kitchen where 3 generations of our family had gathered for meals. Her tone wasn't exactly warm, but I ignored that. City folks sometimes took time to adjust to country living. "It's been in the family since my husband's grandfather built it," I explained, serving them homemade apple pie. "Jackson learned to walk in this very room." Heather smiled thinly. "How rustic." Of course, it could really be something with the right renovations. I noticed Jackson shifting uncomfortably, but said nothing. This was his girlfriend. I needed to make an effort. "I'd love to show you around the property tomorrow," I offered. "The wildflowers are blooming near the creek, and it's just gorgeous this time of year." "Oh, that sounds dusty," Heather laughed, patting my arm like I was a child. "I have sensitive allergies, but you two go ahead. I have some calls to make anyway." That weekend, I noticed how Jackson seemed different around her, more reserved, less likely to mention our family traditions or childhood memories. When Heather stepped away, he was the son I knew. When she returned, he became someone else entirely. 3 months later, Jackson called to announce their engagement. They'd planned a December wedding, just 8 months away. "We want to move quickly," he explained. "Heather has some exciting business opportunities on the horizon." I threw myself into being supportive. I offered to host the wedding at the ranch, but Heather had already selected a luxury hotel in Dallas. I suggested using Sam's mother's wedding veil, but Heather had commissioned a designer. With each suggestion politely declined, I stepped back further, determined not to be the intrusive mother-in-law. Then came the day I found the blueprints. Jackson had asked me to grab some documents from his car while he and Heather were at lunch with her parents. As I reached for the folder on the passenger seat, several large rolled papers fell to the floor. Unrolling them to put them back, I froze at what I saw. Across the top of the elaborate drawings read, Pinewood Estates, luxury living in the heart of Texas. Below was a rendering of our family ranch transformed into a sprawling housing development. Where our old oak trees stood were swimming pools. Where cattle grazed were tennis courts. And where our farmhouse had welcomed 3 generations, there was nothing at all. My hands trembled as I continued searching. Behind the blueprints was a folder labeled Acquisition Planning. Inside was a drafted sales contract for Pinewood Ranch, with Walker Development listed as the buyer. The same Walker as Heather's family name. That moment, standing beside my son's car with the proof of betrayal in my hands, was when I first felt the ground shifting beneath me. But I still couldn't believe Jackson would sell our home without telling me. There had to be some explanation. I carefully returned everything exactly as I'd found it. That night, I watched my son closely. Had he changed so much, or had I been blind to who he'd become? The next morning, I decided to confront Jackson. He was sitting on the porch swing, scrolling through his phone while Heather was out shopping. "I saw the blueprints," I said, sitting beside him. "For Pinewood Estates." His head snapped up, color draining from his face. "You went through my things?" "I wasn't snooping, Jackson. They fell out when I was getting the folder you asked for." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father it made my chest ache. "It's not what you think, Mom. We're just exploring options. Options that include selling our family home to your fiancé's family business without discussing it with me first." Jackson stood up, defensive now. "Nothing's decided yet, but you have to admit this place is too much for you to manage alone, and it's a smart investment opportunity." "This isn't an investment property, Jackson. It's our home, your heritage. It's also a financial asset that's being underutilized," he countered, sounding like he was pitching a client. "Heather's family has a vision for developing this area that could benefit everyone. Property values would increase tremendously. And where would I live? Where would you bring your children to learn about their grandfather and great-grandfather?" Jackson looked away. "We'd figure something out. Maybe keep a small parcel with the house. Or build you something new and more manageable." I felt my heart breaking. This wasn't my son talking. These were someone else's words coming from his mouth. "Your father wanted this land to stay in the family," I said quietly. "He believed in preserving it, not parceling it off to the highest bidder." Jackson's expression hardened. "Dad's been gone for 20 years, Mom. Times change. People change. You can't keep living in the past." The conversation ended there, with nothing resolved. In the following weeks, I tried repeatedly to connect with Heather, hoping to understand her better. I invited her to lunch, offered to help with wedding preparations, even suggested we look at mother of the groom dresses together. Each attempt was met with a polite but firm redirection. "You really don't need to be involved in the planning, Blair," she told me over the phone. "We have everything handled. The wedding coordinator is taking care of all the details." I was hurt, but determined not to create conflict. This was my son's choice of partner. I needed to respect that. As the wedding approached, I noticed more and more changes in Jackson. He stopped bringing up childhood memories. He dismissed family traditions as outdated. He even criticized the way I dressed. "Maybe you could update your look a bit for the wedding, Mom," he suggested one day, eyeing my comfortable jeans and flannel shirt. "Heather's family is pretty fashion conscious. I just want you to fit in." My best friend Linda noticed the change too. We'd been friends since high school, and she'd watched Jackson grow up. She came over one afternoon to help me pick out a dress for the wedding. "I don't like the way that girl talks to you," Linda said bluntly, after I told her about another dismissive comment Heather had made about the ranch. "And I really don't like the way Jackson lets her do it." "She's just different from us," I defended weakly. "City people have different values." Linda fixed me with a stern look. "Respect isn't a rural or urban value, Blair. It's a human one. That girl doesn't respect you, and she's teaching your son not to respect you either." Deep down, I feared she was right. But what could I do? Fighting with Heather would only push Jackson further away. The final dress fitting was particularly difficult. I'd chosen a simple but elegant navy blue dress that Linda assured me looked lovely. When I showed Heather a photo, hoping for her approval, her response was cutting. "Well, it's not what I would choose, but I suppose it works for someone your age." I was 65, not 95. The comment stung, but I swallowed my pride and smiled. The real shock came at the wedding planning meeting. As the coordinator reviewed the ceremony details, I realized I'd been excluded from the traditional mother of the groom role. I wouldn't be escorted down the aisle. I wouldn't light the family candle. I was being treated like a distant relative rather than the groom's mother. When I quietly asked Jackson about it later, he avoided meeting my eyes. Heather thought it would be simpler this way. Her family is really traditional about certain things. Traditional enough to exclude the groom's only parent? It didn't make sense, but I let it go. This was their day. I would play whatever role they assigned me. 2 weeks before the wedding, I attended a town council meeting about water conservation. Pinewood Ranch sat atop a natural spring that fed into the local watershed, and I always took our environmental responsibilities seriously. After the meeting, a man I didn't recognize approached me. He introduced himself as Dr. Alan Peters, a geologist working with the State Environmental Agency. "Mrs. Thompson, I've been meaning to contact you," he said. "We've been conducting surveys in your area, and I thought you should know your property has significant oil deposits beneath it. Not enough for a major operation, but certainly valuable." I was surprised, but not particularly interested. "Thank you, but we're not looking to drill on our land. The environmental impact wouldn't be worth it." He nodded appreciatively. "That's commendable. Still, I thought you should know. There's been increased interest in land acquisition in your area. Some developers have been quite aggressive." His words sent a chill through me. Walker Development, Heather's family business. That evening, I was sitting on the back porch when I overheard Heather on the phone. She hadn't noticed me in the shadows as she paced along the garden path. "Daddy, it's all going according to plan," she said, her voice animated. "The wedding's in 2 weeks, and then we'll have access to everything." "Yes, I know the old woman is attached to the place, but that's not our problem. Of course Jackson will sign. He'll do anything I ask. Once we close the deal, you can bulldoze that shack and start construction immediately." I sat perfectly still, afraid to breathe. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, forming a picture I couldn't bear to see. Heather wasn't in love with my son. She was in love with our land. And Jackson, blinded by her beauty and charm, couldn't see it. The next day, with a heaviness in my heart I hadn't felt since Sam died, I drove into town to see Thomas Williams. He'd been Sam's best friend since childhood and had handled all our legal matters for decades. If anyone could help me understand my options, it was Thomas. His office was above the hardware store, unchanged since the 70s, with wood paneling and a ceiling fan that creaked rhythmically. Thomas, now 70 with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, listened without interruption as I explained everything, from the blueprints to the overheard phone call. When I finished, Thomas removed his glasses and sighed deeply. "Blair, I was afraid something like this might happen someday." "What do you mean?" "When Sam got sick, he was worried about protecting the ranch. He knew Jackson was young and might be influenced to sell someday, especially with the way land values were increasing." Thomas opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. "Sam and I set up some legal protections that you don't know about. He wanted it that way, so you wouldn't worry." For the next hour, Thomas explained how Sam had created a complex trust structure for Pinewood Ranch. While I technically held the deed, the land itself was under various legal protections that made it nearly impossible to develop commercially without multiple approvals, including mine. Even if Jackson inherited the deed tomorrow, he couldn't sell to developers without your signature on multiple documents, Thomas explained. "And there's more. Part of the property was placed in a conservation easement to protect the watershed. That land can never be developed, period." I felt a rush of gratitude for my husband's foresight, followed by a wave of sadness that we needed these protections at all. What had happened to our son that he would consider selling his birthright? "I don't want to use these legal maneuvers against Jackson," I said. "I want him to understand on his own why this land matters." Thomas nodded sympathetically. "I know. But Sam wanted you to have options if things went sideways. And Blair, there's something else you should know about Walker Development." He turned to his computer and pulled up several news articles. "They've been buying up family farms and ranches across 3 counties. Once they acquire the properties, they exploit every loophole to avoid the promises they made to the original owners. 3 families have sued them for fraud in the past 2 years. He showed me the cases. Elderly farmers promised they could live out their days in their homes, only to be evicted when construction began. Agreements to preserve historic buildings, broken once the deeds transferred. Water rights revoked, leaving neighboring properties without irrigation. These people are ruthless, Blair, and it sounds like they've set their sights on Pinewood. My hands trembled as I drove home. I needed to talk to Jackson, to make him see what was happening, but when I arrived, I found him packing an overnight bag. Heather's parents invited us to dinner at their country club, he explained, barely looking at me. We're staying in the city until the wedding. It's just easier with all the last-minute details. Jackson, we need to talk about the ranch, I began. He cut me off with an irritated gesture. Not now, Mom. We're already late. It's important. It's about Heather's family business and their plans for our land. His face darkened. Stop it. Just stop. Heather warned me you might try to cause problems before the wedding. She said jealousy makes people do crazy things. Jealousy? I was stunned. Jackson, I want you to be happy. I've tried to welcome Heather, but there are things happening that you don't understand. No, you don't understand, he snapped. This is my future. Heather is my future. If you can't accept that, then maybe you shouldn't come to the wedding at all. The words hit me like a physical blow. You don't mean that. He wouldn't meet my eyes as he grabbed his bag. Just think about what matters more to you, Mom. Your control over this rundown ranch, or your relationship with me. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for hours, turning everything over in my mind. How had we come to this? When had money and status become more important to Jackson than family and heritage? The next morning, a courier delivered an envelope. Inside was a printed note on expensive stationery, Mrs. Thompson, due to last-minute changes, your presence is no longer required at the rehearsal dinner. Sincerely, Dorothy Walker. Heather's mother had uninvited me from my own son's rehearsal dinner. I called Jackson immediately, but the call went to voicemail. I texted him, but received no response. It was happening already. They were cutting me out of his life, piece by piece. The day before the wedding, I received another shock. The seating chart for the reception had been emailed to all guests. I was assigned to table 29, in the far corner of the ballroom, with people I'd never met, not with family, not even with friends from town who'd been invited. I'd been deliberately isolated. Despite everything, I still planned to attend with my head held high. I carefully wrapped our wedding gift, a small box containing 2 precious items. The first was Sam's pocket watch, a family heirloom that had passed from father to son for 4 generations. The second was a document I'd had Thomas prepare a signed statement of intent to transfer the ranch deed to Jackson upon my passing, ensuring the property would remain in our family name. It wasn't the full legal transfer, but it was a promise and a gesture of trust. The night before the wedding, as I laid out my navy blue dress and modest pearl jewelry, my computer chimed with a new email notification. The sender was anonymous, the subject line simply, "Urgent. Before you attend the Walker-Thompson wedding." I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a brief message. Heather Walker is not who she pretends to be. She's only marrying your son for the land. See attached photos. With shaking fingers, I clicked on the attachment. The photos had been taken at what appeared to be Heather's bachelorette party the previous weekend. In one image after another, she was wrapped in the arms of a man who definitely wasn't Jackson, kissing him passionately. In the final photo, they were laughing together, champagne glasses raised, with Heather clearly visible saying something to the man. I enlarged the image and felt sick as I made out the words captured mid-sentence. "Just until I get the property, then we can." My whole body went cold. I finally had proof of what I'd suspected, but what would I do with it? Should I show Jackson and risk ruining what should be the happiest day of his life? Or should I stay silent and risk watching him make the biggest mistake of his life? I didn't sleep that night, wrestling with my conscience. By morning, I'd made my decision. I would attend the wedding as planned. I would not show Jackson the photos unless absolutely necessary. I would hope that somehow he would see the truth for himself. Some truths are too painful to be told. They have to be discovered. But I had no idea just how painful the next day's discoveries would be for all of us. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. I dressed carefully in my navy blue dress, clasped my pearl necklace, and drove to the elaborate downtown Dallas hotel where my only child would be married. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the grand ballroom, followed by a reception in the hotel's rooftop garden. I arrived early, hoping for a moment with Jackson before everything began. The lobby was a flurry of activity, with the wedding planner directing staff and vendors with military precision. I approached her, asking where I might find my son. The groom's suite is on the 3rd floor, but the wedding party is not accepting visitors at this time, she informed me without looking up from her clipboard. I'm not a visitor. I'm his mother, I explained. Her eyes flicked up, scanning me briefly. Oh, Mrs. Thompson. Yes, I have a note about you. Whatever that note said, it made her expression change to one of carefully managed politeness. I'm afraid Mr. Thompson specifically requested no interruptions. Perhaps you could just find your seat in the ceremony room? We're opening doors in 20 minutes. Rebuffed but determined not to create a scene, I made my way to the ballroom. A few early guests were already being seated, including Heather's extended family. They were easily identifiable by their matching level of affluence and the way they clustered together, glancing dismissively at the more modestly dressed guests from our side. As I approached, Heather's mother Dorothy spotted me. She was a polished woman in her 50s, with the same blonde hair as her daughter, though hers came from a bottle. She wore an elaborate silver gown that would have been more appropriate for an evening affair than a 2 o'clock wedding. "Blair, you made it," she said, air kissing near my cheek. "I wasn't sure you would after our little adjustment to the rehearsal dinner. We simply had too many people and had to pare down the list. I'm sure you understand." "Of course," I replied, matching her saccharine tone. "Family should always come first at these events." Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Indeed. Speaking of which, we've had to make a few last-minute seating changes for the reception. I hope you don't mind." "I saw that. Table 29 is quite a distance from the family tables." Dorothy's eyes narrowed slightly. "We thought you might be more comfortable with people more, in your style. The family tables will be quite focused on business discussions." Before I could respond, her husband Stephen approached. He was a tall man with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. He'd made his fortune in real estate development, buying up land and transforming it into expensive housing communities and shopping centers. "You must be Jackson's mother," he said, extending his hand. "Dorothy's told me so much about you and your quaint little farm." "Ranch," I corrected gently. "Pinewood Ranch. It's been in my husband's family for 4 generations." "Fascinating," he said. "Clearly not fascinated at all. You know, land like that has tremendous untapped potential. After the wedding, we should discuss some opportunities that could benefit everyone." I smiled placidly. "I look forward to many family discussions in the future." The ballroom doors opened fully, and guests began filing in. I took my seat on the groom's side, noticing that even here, I'd been placed toward the back despite being the mother of the groom. Traditionally, I should have been in the front row. Another deliberate slight. The ceremony itself was lavish but impersonal. No readings or songs that held any meaning to Jackson or our family. No mentions of his father or our heritage. When Jackson appeared at the altar, handsome in his tuxedo but tense around the eyes, I felt a renewed surge of maternal love and worry. He scanned the crowd but didn't seem to notice me. When Heather appeared in her designer gown that had reportedly cost more than most cars, the guests gasped appropriately. She was undeniably beautiful, but as she approached the altar, I noticed she barely looked at Jackson. Her eyes kept darting to her father in the front row, who gave her a small, approving nod. The vows were standard and brief. No personal promises or heartfelt declarations, just the rehearsed words repeated without visible emotion. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Heather's smile seemed more triumphant than joyful. The reception began immediately after, with guests directed to the rooftop garden. I followed the crowd, clutching my small gift bag, hoping to at least have a moment with Jackson to congratulate him. The rooftop had been transformed into a floral wonderland, with white roses and crystal decorations everywhere. A string quartet played softly, as waiters circulated with champagne. I took a glass and found my assigned table in the far corner, where I was seated with distant acquaintances of the Walker family who seemed as confused by their placement as I was. After the first toast by the best man, I decided to make my way to the head table. Gift in hand, I approached just as Jackson and Heather were having a whispered conversation. As I drew near, Heather noticed me first. She leaned in and whispered something to Jackson, whose face immediately darkened. Before I could even speak, Jackson stood abruptly, grabbed my arm, and pulled me several steps away from the table. "What are you doing up here?" he hissed, his voice low but intense. "I wanted to give you your wedding gift," I said, shocked by his tone. "And congratulate you both." "Now isn't a good time, Mom. Heather's family is about to make an important announcement, and she doesn't want any distractions." I held out the small bag. "This will only take a moment, Jackson. It's something special from your father." As I extended the gift, a waiter passing behind me stumbled, spilling champagne down the back of my dress. I gasped at the cold liquid, turning instinctively, causing the gift bag to bump against Jackson's chest, spilling its contents onto the floor. The pocket watch fell with a heavy thud. Heather, who had approached behind Jackson, looked down at it with visible disdain. "What is that ancient thing?" she asked loudly. "It's a family heirloom," I explained, bending to retrieve it. "Sam's grandfather's pocket watch. It's been passed down through the generations." Heather rolled her eyes dramatically. "We don't need old junk cluttering our new home. Besides, Jackson wears a Rolex now." I felt my face flush as I picked up the watch and the envelope containing the deed transfer promise. "This isn't junk, Heather. This is Jackson's heritage. And this," I held up the envelope, "is my promise to preserve that heritage for him." Jackson looked uncomfortable. Heather whispered something else in his ear, her eyes cold and fixed on me. Whatever she said changed something in his face. His expression hardened as he turned back to me. "Get out, Mom," he said, his voice loud enough that nearby guests turned to stare. "My fiancé doesn't want you here." The room seemed to fall silent, though the music continued playing. 200 pairs of eyes turned in our direction. I stood frozen, the champagne cooling on my back, the watch and envelope clutched in my trembling hands. "Jackson," I whispered, "what are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to leave, now. You've been trying to undermine our relationship from the beginning because you can't stand not being the center of my world anymore. Heather was right about you all along." Each word struck like a physical blow. The son I'd raised, the boy I'd poured every ounce of love and sacrifice into for 30 years, was publicly humiliating me at his wedding. Heather stepped forward, a look of false concern on her perfect features. "I think it's best if you go, Blair. You're clearly upset, and this is supposed to be a happy occasion." I looked from her smug face to my son's hardened one. Neither showed a flicker of empathy or regret. In that moment, I realized Linda had been right all along. This wasn't about jealousy or adjustment. This was about respect. And neither of them had any for me. With as much dignity as I could muster, I placed the watch and envelope back in the gift bag and set it on the nearest table. "These belong to you, Jackson, whenever you're ready for them," I said quietly. Then, head held high despite the champagne stains spreading down my back, I walked toward the exit. As I neared the door, I heard Stephen Walker's voice booming over the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, while we're celebrating this wonderful union of our families, I'd like to share some exciting news. Walker Development is proud to announce our newest project, Pinewood Estates, which will break ground next month on what is currently the Thompson family ranch. This luxury development will transform unused farmland into the most exclusive community in the county. And it's all made possible by our new son-in-law, Jackson." A smattering of applause followed, though many guests looked confused or uncomfortable. I paused at the doorway, my hand on the frame for support, so it was already done. They were announcing the development before Jackson had even legally acquired the property from me. The betrayal was complete. As I stepped into the hallway, a young man in a parking attendant uniform approached me hesitantly. "Mrs. Thompson?" "I heard what happened in there. I'm sorry. I thought you should know something." I looked at him questioningly, too emotionally exhausted to speak. "I'm Ryan. I used to date Heather before she met your son." He glanced around nervously. "She's been planning this for over a year. I overheard her talking with her father about targeting your property specifically. Something about water rights and mineral deposits. They've done this before to other families. I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner, but she threatened to ruin my life if I interfered." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This had never been about love. It had been a calculated business move from the very beginning. Heather had sought out my son with the specific intention of gaining access to our land. I thanked Ryan for his honesty and continued to the parking garage. As I drove away from the hotel, leaving behind the son who no longer wanted me and the life I thought we shared, I felt an odd sense of calm replacing the initial shock and pain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I was Blair Thompson of Pinewood Ranch, and I had weathered far worse storms than Heather Walker and her predatory family. They had no idea what they had just started, or who they were really dealing with. The drive back to Pinewood Ranch was the longest 30 miles of my life. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, but I barely noticed. My mind raced with replays of Jackson's cold expression, Heather's triumphant smile, Stephen Walker's premature announcement. The sun was setting by the time I pulled into the long driveway, casting long shadows across the pastures where our cattle grazed peacefully, unaware that their home had just been sold out from under them. Or at least, that's what the Walkers believed. I parked in front of the old farmhouse, its weathered wooden frame glowing amber in the evening light. This house had sheltered 4 generations of Thompsons. The wide front porch where Sam and I used to sit and watch the sunset. The oak tree in the yard where we'd hung a tire swing for Jackson. The flower beds I tended each spring, filled with Sam's favorite Texas bluebonnets. All of it, according to Stephen Walker, would soon be bulldozed to make way for luxury homes. I entered the silent house and headed straight for the bedroom. Peeling off the champagne-stained dress, I stood under the shower until the hot water ran cold, as if I could wash away the day's events. But no amount of water could cleanse the wound of my son's betrayal. Wrapped in my robe, I made a cup of strong coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd taught Jackson to do his homework, where we'd played countless board games on rainy days, where we'd shared our grief after Sam died. Now I sat alone, surrounded by the ghosts of happier times, wondering where I'd gone wrong. Had I been too permissive? Too strict? Had moving to the city changed him so fundamentally? Or had the seeds of this betrayal always been there, waiting for someone like Heather to water them? A soft knock at the back door startled me from my thoughts. Frank Miller, our elderly ranch hand who'd worked the property since before Jackson was born, stood on the porch, hat in hand. "Evening, Miss Blair," he said, his weathered face creased with concern. "Saw your lights on. Thought I'd check if you're okay. Heard about what happened at the wedding from Linda." News traveled fast in small towns. I invited him in and poured him a cup of coffee. "I appreciate you checking on me, Frank." He settled his lanky frame into a chair, his eyes kind beneath bushy white eyebrows. "Been working this land 43 years now. Seen a lot of things come and go. But never thought I'd see the day a Thompson would sell it off." "He hasn't sold it yet," I said with more conviction than I felt. "And if I have anything to say about it, he never will." Frank nodded slowly. "Those Walker folks have been sniffing around here for years. They bought the Anderson place last spring, promised old Joe he could stay in the farmhouse. 2 months later, they had him moved to a nursing home in Dallas, said it was for his own good. I've heard similar stories," I acknowledged. "Thomas Williams told me they've done this to other families too." "More than a few," Frank confirmed. "They're building some kind of resort complex. Need lots of water for golf courses and such. That's why they want this land so bad. Our natural springs." He hesitated, then continued. "Miss Blair, there's something else you should know. Something Sam made me promise not to tell unless it was absolutely necessary." My attention sharpened. "What is it, Frank?" "The night before he died, Sam called me to this very kitchen, gave me a sealed envelope and made me swear I'd keep it hidden until you or Jackson needed it most." Frank reached into his jacket and pulled out a yellowed envelope. "I reckon that time is now." With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a letter in Sam's familiar handwriting, dated just days before his sudden heart attack. As I read, tears blurred my vision. "My dearest Blair," it began. "If you're reading this, then Frank has determined our family legacy is in jeopardy. I've suspected for some time that developers would eventually target our land, so I've taken steps to protect it that even Thomas doesn't know about." Sam explained that Pinewood Ranch wasn't just any property. Due to its natural springs and position in the watershed, he'd worked with state environmental agencies to have it classified as protected watershed land. This special designation, filed quietly and without fanfare, meant that major development was legally prohibited regardless of ownership. The deed may transfer, Sam wrote, but the land's protected status cannot be removed without extensive environmental impact studies and public hearings. No matter what happens, no one can bulldoze our home or destroy the natural resources we've stewarded for generations. He'd included copies of the official documents, signed and notarized, establishing the protected status, and there was more. Sam had also created legal provisions, ensuring that even if I transferred the deed to Jackson, I would retain executive decision-making power over any development or major changes to the property until my death or voluntary relinquishment of those rights. I know our son, the letter continued. He has a good heart, but he's always been drawn to wealth and status in a way neither of us understands. I fear someday someone might exploit that weakness and try to take what generations of Thompsons have built. This is my final gift to you both, protection from decisions made in haste that cannot be undone. I lowered the letter, my mind racing with this new information. Frank, do you know what this means? He nodded, a small smile lifting the corner of his mouth. Means those Walker folks just had a mighty big announcement for a development they can't legally build. I felt a surge of gratitude for my husband's foresight, followed by a renewed determination. This wasn't just about saving our home anymore. This was about standing up to people who exploited others for profit, who used manipulation and deceit to take what wasn't theirs. Tomorrow morning I need to see Thomas again, I said. We need to make sure all these protections are still active and enforceable. Frank rose to leave. You know the whole town's behind you, Miss Blair. Folks are already talking about what happened at the wedding. Nobody likes the idea of Pinewood being turned into some fancy subdivision for rich city people. After he left, I spread Sam's documents across the table, reading every word carefully. The environmental protection was solid, filed with both state and federal agencies. The legal provisions regarding development rights were equally binding. Sam had thought of everything. I was still at the kitchen table when my phone began ringing around 10:30. Calls and messages from concerned friends and neighbors poured in, each expressing support and outrage at how I'd been treated. Linda called 3 times, offering to come over, but I assured her I was okay, just tired. Near midnight, exhausted but clearer of mind than I'd been all day, I finally went to bed. As I lay in the darkness, I thought of Jackson. Despite everything, he was still my son. I had to believe that somewhere beneath the stranger who had publicly humiliated me was the boy I'd raised, the boy who had once treasured this land as much as his father had. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, that much was certain. The Walkers would discover their plans were built on quicksand, and Jackson would have to face the consequences of his choices. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of the home they thought they'd already taken from me, I found my resolve. They wanted a fight. They would get one. But not the kind they were expecting. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, my phone pinged with a new message. It was from County Commissioner Dave Harmon. Blair, just heard Walker Development submitted permits for construction at Pinewood, scheduled to begin tomorrow. Clearly filed before the wedding. Something's not right here. Call me first thing. Sleep eluded me after that. They weren't waiting. They planned to break ground immediately, before any potential complications could arise, before I could organize any resistance. But they had overlooked one crucial detail. They didn't have the keys to the property yet, and without those keys, without legal access, any entry onto Pinewood Ranch would be trespassing. I smiled in the darkness. Let them come. Blair Thompson was ready. I was already dressed and on my second cup of coffee when the phone rang at 7:30 the next morning. Jackson's name flashed on the screen. Taking a deep breath, I answered. Mom. His voice sounded strained. We need to talk. Yes, we do, I agreed, keeping my tone neutral. A brief pause. I need the ranch keys. All of them. Heather's father is bringing some people out to start surveying the property this morning. No apology. No acknowledgement of what had happened yesterday. Just a demand for the keys. I closed my eyes briefly, centering myself. I think you should come out here so we can discuss this in person, I replied calmly. There are some things you need to understand before any surveys happen. There's nothing to discuss. The deal is done. Is it? I kept my voice even. Then you won't mind bringing the signed paperwork when you come to collect the keys. Another pause. Fine. We'll be there in an hour. I spent that hour making preparations. I called Thomas Williams, who promised to arrive before Jackson. I reviewed Sam's documents once more, making copies of the key provisions. I even put on a fresh pot of coffee and set out cups in the dining room, as if this were any normal family discussion. Thomas arrived first, carrying his briefcase and a determined expression. "I reviewed everything overnight, Blair," he said as we sat at the kitchen table. "Sam's protections are rock solid. The Walkers can bluster all they want, but legally, they can't develop this property the way they've announced." "What about the deed?" Jackson said the deal is done. Thomas shook his head. "Not possible. Any transfer of this property requires your signature on multiple documents, unless you sign something." "I haven't signed anything," I assured him. "Then he's either lying or badly misinformed. Either way, this property is still legally yours." We heard vehicles approaching up the driveway. Not just one, but several. Through the window, I saw Jackson's car followed by a black SUV and a truck with the Walker Development logo on its side. "Here we go," I murmured. Thomas placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You're in the right here, Blair. Remember that." Jackson entered without knocking, something he'd never done before. He looked tired, his face drawn. Behind him came Heather, immaculately dressed, despite the early hour, and her father, Stephen, exuding confidence and impatience. "Mom," Jackson began awkwardly, "this is Heather's father, Stephen Walker." "We've met," I said, extending my hand with forced politeness. "At the wedding, just before you announced plans to bulldoze my home." Stephen's handshake was firm, his smile cold. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand this must be difficult. Change always is. But I assure you we have generous provisions for your relocation." "That's very thoughtful," I replied. "But relocation won't be necessary. Please, let's all sit down." They followed me to the dining room, where Jackson noticed Thomas for the first time. "Why is Thomas here? We don't need lawyers for a simple key handover." "I think we do," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. "Especially since you seem to believe you've already made a deal to sell property you don't own." Heather's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together. "What are you talking about? Jackson inherited half this property when his father died, and you promised to sign over the rest." I turned to Jackson. "Is that what you told them?" "Because that's not accurate, as you well know." Jackson shifted uncomfortably. "I told them Dad left the ranch to both of us, and you'd agreed to transfer full ownership to me before the wedding." "I never agreed to that," I said firmly. "I considered a future transfer as my gift to you both, but that was before I understood what you planned to do with it." Stephen Walker's confidence didn't waver. "Regardless, Jackson has assured us the property will be transferred immediately. We've already filed the necessary permits and scheduled contractors." "Based on what authority?" Thomas asked, opening his briefcase. "No deed transfer has been recorded. Mrs. Thompson remains the sole legal owner of Pinewood Ranch." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Stephen's face. "Jackson?" My son looked trapped. I thought it would be a simple formality. Mom always said the ranch would be mine someday." "Someday," I emphasized. "Not today. And certainly not to be demolished for a housing development." Heather's composure began to crack. "Daddy, fix this. We have investors coming next week." Stephen straightened his tie, switching tactics. "Mrs. Thompson, perhaps we got off on the wrong foot. Walker Development is prepared to make a very generous offer for this property, well above market value." "The property isn't for sale," I said simply. "Everything has a price," he insisted. "Name yours." "It's not about money, Mr. Walker. This land has been in my husband's family for generations. It's not just property to us. It's a legacy." Heather made a dismissive sound. "Legacy? It's a rundown ranch, barely breaking even. We're offering you financial security for the rest of your life." "Actually," Thomas interjected, "there's another issue you should be aware of. Even if Mrs. Thompson were willing to sell, which she isn't, this property has special environmental protections that prohibit the kind of development you've announced." He laid out copies of Sam's documents, explaining the watershed protections and development restrictions. With each point, Stephen Walker's expression darkened. "These can be challenged," he said dismissively. "Environmental designations are overturned all the time." "You're welcome to try," Thomas replied. "But the process would take years. require multiple environmental impact studies, and involve public hearings where I suspect the local community would voice strong opposition. Stephen's facade of friendly negotiation dropped entirely. "This is absurd." Jackson assured us there would be no complications. All eyes turned to my son, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "I didn't know about any environmental protections," he muttered. "Because you never asked," I said quietly. "You were so eager to please Heather and her family that you promised them something that wasn't yours to give." Heather stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Daddy, tell them what happens to people who try to block our developments." Stephen shot her a warning look, but she was too angry to notice. "We have ways of dealing with stubborn landowners," she continued. "Remember the Richardsons? They thought they could stop us too." "Heather," Stephen cautioned, "this isn't the time." But she was on a roll now, her true colors fully revealed. "We don't need their permission. Once Jackson and I are married, there are other ways to gain control of this property." "You already had the wedding," I reminded her. "But that doesn't change the legal ownership of this land." "The wedding was just for show," she snapped. "The real legal work happens after." Jackson stared at her. "What do you mean, just for show?" Something in his tone made Heather pause. She looked at him as if suddenly remembering he was there. "I mean, the important part is the legal union," she backtracked. "The ceremony is just tradition." But Jackson wasn't buying it anymore. "That's not what you meant. You said just for show. Like the whole thing was, what? A performance?" The room fell silent. Even Stephen Walker seemed to be holding his breath. "Jackson," Heather said, her voice softening artificially. "Don't be silly. Of course I love you. I'm just frustrated with this unnecessary complication." "Unnecessary complication," he repeated slowly. "Is that what my family home is to you? A complication?" I watched my son's face as realization slowly dawned. The Jackson I knew, the boy I'd raised, was starting to emerge from behind the mask of the man Heather had molded him into. "Was any of it real?" he asked quietly. "Us? The relationship? Or was it all about the ranch from the beginning?" Heather glanced at her father, who gave a small nod, as if acknowledging they needed to change strategy. "Of course it was real," she insisted, placing her hand on Jackson's arm. "I love you. The ranch is just a bonus, a way for us to build our future together." But Jackson was finally seeing clearly. "That's why you rushed the wedding, why you insisted on announcing the development immediately. You never planned to live here. You were going to destroy it." "Not destroy," Stephen interjected smoothly. "Improve, transform, create value." Jackson turned to him. "By bulldozing my family home? By erasing 4 generations of my history?" "History doesn't pay bills," Stephen replied coldly. "This land is worth millions if developed properly. As it stands, it's just dirt and old buildings." I saw the exact moment something broke in Jackson, watching his expression change from confusion to hurt to anger. "Get out," he said quietly. "Jackson," Heather began. "Get out," he repeated, louder this time. "Both of you. Now." Stephen stood, straightening his suit jacket. "You're making a mistake, son. A costly one." "The mistake was ever trusting you," Jackson replied. "Or your daughter." Heather's beautiful face contorted with rage. "You pathetic mama's boy. Do you think I ever loved you? Do you think I could love someone who grew up in this backwards place? You were a means to an end, nothing more." Her words hung in the air like poison. Jackson stepped back as if physically struck. "The land," he whispered. "That's all you ever wanted." "Of course it was the land," Heather sneered. "Why else would I waste 2 years with someone like you? My father needed the water rights for our resort development. Your precious little ranch sits on the perfect watershed." Stephen grabbed her arm. "Enough, Heather. This isn't helping." But she was beyond caring now. "Do you know how hard it was? Pretending to be interested in your boring stories about growing up here? Pretending I didn't mind your mother's constant presence? Acting like I wanted to build a life with you?" Each word was a dagger, and I watched them sink into my son one by one. Whatever doubts he might have had about Heather's true nature vanished in that moment. "Thomas," I said quietly, "I think it's time Mr. Walker and his daughter left the property. They don't have my permission to be here." Thomas nodded. "Any further presence would constitute trespassing, Mr. Walker. I suggest you leave voluntarily before we involve the sheriff." Stephen's face hardened as he realized their plan had completely unraveled. "This isn't over, Mrs. Thompson. Not by a long shot." "Yes," I said, standing to my full height. "It is." With one last venomous glare, Heather stormed out, her father following close behind. We heard car doors slam, engines start, and then the sound of vehicles speeding down the driveway, gravel spraying in their wake. In the sudden silence, Jackson stood motionless, staring at nothing. 2 days ago, he'd been a groom celebrating his marriage. Now he was a man whose world had collapsed around him. "Jackson," I said softly. He turned to me, his eyes filled with unshed tears. "Mom," he whispered, "what have I done?" Jackson sank into a chair, his head in his hands. The sound of the Walkers' vehicles faded into the distance, leaving only the familiar creaking of the old farmhouse and the distant lowing of cattle in the fields. "I've ruined everything," Jackson murmured, his voice barely audible. "I believed her. I defended her. I chose her over you." I moved to sit beside him, though I didn't touch him yet. The wound between us was still too fresh, the betrayal too raw. "You're not the first person to be fooled by someone they loved," I said gently. "And you won't be the last." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, but I should have seen it. There were so many signs. The way she talked about the ranch, how she never wanted to spend time here, how she isolated me from you. He shook his head in disbelief. "I was so blind." "Love can be blinding," I acknowledged. And Heather knew exactly which buttons to push. Your desire for success, for status, things I couldn't give you here. Thomas quietly excused himself, saying he'd call later to discuss next steps. Once he'd gone, Jackson and I moved to the kitchen, the heart of our home, where so many family discussions had taken place over the years. I made fresh coffee while Jackson sat at the table, still looking shell-shocked. "Yesterday at the wedding," he began haltingly, "the things I said to you. I can't believe those words came out of my mouth." "What did Heather say to you right before?" I asked, placing a mug in front of him. He closed his eyes, remembering. "She said you were trying to sabotage everything, that you were jealous of her and wanted to control me forever, that if I didn't make a stand right then, you'd always come between us." He looked up, anguished, and I believed her. I publicly humiliated my own mother because a woman I'd known for 2 years told me to. "She's very convincing," I said, taking the seat across from him. "And she had years to work on you, to slowly turn you against me and everything this place represents. But that's just it, Mom. I let her. I wanted to believe her because she represented everything I thought I wanted. Success, wealth, status." He gestured around the kitchen. "I was so focused on getting away from here that I couldn't see what I already had." We sat in silence for a moment, the ticking of the old clock on the wall marking the passage of time. Outside, the morning sun illuminated the fields and pastures of Pinewood Ranch, the land that had almost been lost. "What happens now?" Jackson finally asked. "With the wedding, the legal stuff, everything." "The marriage can be annulled," I said practically. "Thomas will help with that. As for the ranch, legally nothing has changed. It's still our family home." "The ranch isn't yours," Jackson said suddenly, looking directly at me. I frowned, confused by his words. "Those were the 4 words, weren't they? What you were going to tell me when I called demanding the keys." I nodded slowly. "The ranch isn't yours. But it wasn't meant as a rejection, Jackson. It was a statement of fact. This land doesn't belong to any one person. Not to me, not to you. It belongs to the generations of Thompsons, who built it, maintained it, loved it, and to the generations who will come after us. If there are any," he said bitterly, "I've made such a mess of everything." "You're 30 years old," I reminded him. "Your life isn't over because of one mistake, even a big one. Your father would be the first to tell you that." Mentioning Sam seemed to open something in Jackson. "I miss him," he admitted. "I miss who I was when he was alive. Everything seemed clearer then." "I miss him too. Every single day." Jackson reached across the table and took my hand, the first physical contact between us since before the wedding. "I'm so sorry, Mom, for all of it. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I hope someday you can." I squeezed his hand. "I already do. You're my son. Nothing will ever change that." Tears spilled down his cheeks then, the first I'd seen since he was a boy. All the pain and regret he'd been holding back came pouring out. I moved to his side of the table and held him while he cried, like I had when he'd fallen from his bike or lost a baseball game, though the stakes were so much higher now. When his tears finally subsided, he looked embarrassed. Some businessman I am, completely taken in by the oldest trick in the book. Don't be too hard on yourself, I advised. The Walkers have done this before. They're professionals at manipulation and deceit. Jackson's expression hardened. They need to be stopped. They're probably already targeting some other family, some other property. Perhaps, I agreed. But that's for another day. Right now, you need to focus on healing. The next few weeks were a period of recovery and rebuilding, both for Jackson and for our relationship. He moved back to the ranch temporarily while the legal process of annulling his marriage proceeded. Thomas discovered that Heather had been planning this scheme for nearly 3 years, systematically targeting Jackson after identifying our ranch as key to her father's development plans. The day the annulment was finalized, Jackson and I sat on the front porch watching the sunset, a tradition we'd shared with Sam what seemed like a lifetime ago. "I got offered a new job today," Jackson said. "A development company in Austin. Sustainable building, eco-friendly designs, nothing like Walker development." "That sounds perfect for you," I said sincerely. "You always had an eye for design, even as a child." He nodded, looking out over the pastures. "It would mean moving away again." "I know. But not like before," he added quickly. "I'd come home regularly, and I was thinking maybe we could use some of the land for sustainable agriculture. Not the whole ranch, just the eastern section. Something that could complement what you're already doing here." I smiled, recognizing this as the olive branch it was. "I'd like that, Jackson. And about the deed," he continued, "I don't want it. Not now, probably not ever. This land should stay in your name as long as you're alive." "Are you sure? Your father always intended for it to pass to you eventually." Jackson shook his head. "After what happened, I don't trust myself with that responsibility yet. Maybe someday, but not now." 6 months passed. Spring came to Pinewood Ranch, bringing new calves to the pastures and wildflowers to the fields. Jackson visited every other weekend, gradually reconnecting with the land and with me. He seemed more at peace than I'd seen him in years, finding satisfaction in his new job and in the small sustainable farming project we'd started together on the eastern pasture. It was during one of these visits that he brought a guest, a woman named Jillian, who worked as the veterinarian for several ranches in the area. They'd met when she came to check on our new calves, and though Jackson was proceeding with appropriate caution after his experience with Heather, I could see genuine warmth between them. "She loves the land as much as we do," Jackson told me, as we watched Jillian expertly examining a young heifer in the barn, "and she can spot a phony from a mile away. Says she knew something was off about Heather the first time they met at the feed store." I smiled, seeing the tentative hope in my son's eyes. "She seems wonderful, Jackson, real in a way Heather never was." That evening, as the three of us sat on the porch enjoying a simple dinner, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before Sam died. The future of Pinewood Ranch stretched before us, not as a battlefield of family conflict, but as a legacy preserved through struggle and redemption. Jackson had been humbled by his experience, but not broken. If anything, he was stronger now, more grounded in what truly mattered. And I had been reminded of my own strength, my ability to stand firm when everything I valued was threatened. In the golden light of the setting sun, I thought about the lessons we'd both learned, about recognizing true value beyond monetary worth, about standing your ground when pressured to compromise your principles, about the true meaning of family and legacy. But most importantly, we'd learned that sometimes the hardest words to say are the most necessary ones. In my case, 4 simple words that had changed everything. The ranch isn't yours. Not a rejection of my son, but a recognition that some things are bigger than individual ownership or control. Some legacies are meant to be shared, protected, and passed down. Some roots run too deep to be severed by greed or manipulation. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jackson reached over and squeezed my hand, a simple gesture of love and gratitude that said more than words ever could. Pinewood Ranch had weathered another storm, and we had emerged stronger for it. If you've ever had to stand your ground to protect what matters most, I hope my story has resonated with you. Have you ever had to say difficult words to someone you love because it was necessary? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening. And remember, the most valuable legacies aren't measured in dollars, but in the love and principles we pass down through generations.